So why don't you start out by telling us your name, what you're running for, and what party you're running for?
Yeah, so my name is Morgan Phillips. I'm running for state representative in the 105th district. I am running as a Democrat.
Okay. What are some of the goals that you would like to see accomplished if you get into office?
So I'm 25. I want to see young people more involved. That was kind of my main reason for running in the first place. Obviously, I'm young people, and now I'm more involved, so I guess I've kind of succeeded on that. But some of my goals are kind of related to that. I mean, I want the future to be a good place. I kind of want to shape the future instead of just letting it shape me. I think it's easy to forget sometimes, like, how important these state representative and, county boards also here tonight, how important these can be, like, to your future, both, as a young person and for everybody else. So a couple things I'm looking at are, my district's very rural, so agricultural issues, things like, so for example, topsoil, it takes about 100,000 years or more to get 1 inch. So, when I think about, like, farmers, a lot of them understand, like, how important that resource is, and they do want to be able to preserve it. So I want to make it easy for them to do that. Things like, we've already got stuff like no-till, but potentially like cover crops, like just being able to encourage all that so that those agricultural resources are still there for, people like you and me in the future. I want our state to still kind of be well, I guess not a bread basket exactly, but a corn basket of the world, certainly. Like our schools, I want to see our schools well supported. I went to a school up near where I live in Boston. We had 80 kids for a K through 8. My class was 14, and that was quite large. And so, we didn't always have as many resources as places that are in, say, the suburbs do, where they have a lot more money. And because we use local property taxes, how good your school is very dependent on how much money your area has. After I went to high school at Putnam County for a year, I transferred to the Illinois Math and Science Academy, which is a public school, but it's up in Aurora, and they pull people from all over the state. So I met lots of different kinds of people there, and I knew at least one kid who had a chandelier in their high school, which I thought was kind of nuts because my grade school, like in 8th grade, we finally got smart boards. Before that, we've been using, because we got a grant, but before that, we've been using the clear, like the light box that projects things up on the wall with like a clear sheet.
I remember. I remember those.
And we were still using them, even though, like how practical is that? Like, our textbooks were sometimes out of date, and I know it can be even worse in other areas. So for me, as a young person, like I don't think it's right that we determine like how good of an education somebody gets by their zip code. So that's something that I'd like to see changed. Another one that I'm pretty interested in is ranked choice voting. We've seen a few other states do it. I know Alaska and Maine, and I think there's a couple others as well. And it kind of allows for a little more civility. I think it makes it easier to run. Like, if you don't want to run as one of the major parties, if you want to represent something else for one reason or another, I think it's very useful to actually be able to vote for somebody because you like them instead of just voting against somebody's opponent, which is, I think, sometimes what happens now. And I think it discourages young people, especially, to think that they have to, they're just voting against the person they hate instead of voting for their favorite candidate. And I'd really like to see more young people get involved, as I already said. So that could be a move towards that. I think we just need to make it easier for people to get civically involved regardless. For example, I was at least curious about, like, if you run as an independent, like, what other requirements and everything. So if you run as in either party, you have to get 500 signatures. You get it before the primary election. If you run as an independent, you have to get 800. You get it after the election. You have kind of less time, less support. We just make it really difficult. And then, of course, even if you get on the ballot, probably nobody's going to vote for you because they just assume you're never going to win anyway. And I've long thought that that's a shame. We, especially like in my area, I always think it's better, like, the more people you have on the ballot, the more options you have to choose between. It lets you make better, more informed decisions. And I think ranked choice voting and, making it more practical for people to run as independents if they want to, or, with third parties, whatever you want to do. I think all those things could actually lead to, better, more free and fair elections.
How do you think the Pretrial Fairness Act has been working out? We've had about a year of no cash bail. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm not going to claim to be an expert. I'm not like in law enforcement. I think the idea behind it is pretty solid. I don't really want people to be able to leave prison just because they have enough money. Like if somebody's, hitting their wife and they end up in prison, but like they happen to have a good job, so they have a lot of money, then they can pay cash bail and leave and go hit their wife's school. And for me, that's always seemed kind of backwards. I mean, I really think it's much better to leave it up to the judges and, our police officers to actually decide, like, is somebody a flight risk? Like, should they be here or not? Because, I mean, frankly, it costs us money to keep people in jail. It costs us money. So if we want to actually, like, save the state money and, I mean, frankly, if you end up in jail, even if you actually didn't do it, if you end up there but you can't pay bail, now you're stuck in jail for a while and you may lose your job during that time. So you essentially make it worse. You make it more difficult for people who make less money. I mean, it's very much like how a fine is, if you're rich enough, just an amount you pay to, like, park there, right? Like if you're going to be fined for parking here, but it's like $300, and they're like, well, I have that much money, so I don't care, I'm parking anyway. It's kind of like that, right? Like it's annoying when people who are rich get away with things just because they're rich and then they get to leave if they want to. I mean, if the only thing deciding whether somebody's in jail or not is bail, I don't think that actually tells you anything. It doesn't actually, like, help us at all. So for cash bail, I think it's generally better to have it gone. I think it's always going to be a transition period, right? Like, it's never easy to make these kinds of changes, but I think in the long run, it's probably a better idea. Just because, like I said, I mean, it does cost us money to keep people in there. It potentially loses them their job, even if they're innocent. And, like, you don't know for sure, like, if any given person who's in jail has done the crime or not. I mean, there may be evidence one way or the other, but I'm not going to know that. And so for me, I feel much more comfortable knowing that, like, if a judge is like, no, this person is a flight risk, or this person is a risk to actually, like, go on and do more harm to the community, that they can be like, no, they can't leave. They have to stay. We won't let them leave. And it can't be just like, well, it's a few $1,000s, and if the person has enough money, they can be let back out into the community. For me, that's, like I said, that's always been pretty concerning.
How do you think that cannabis legalization has been going since it was legalized in 2020?
I think it's been going pretty well. Clearly the state's been able to make money on it because they're able to tax it now. I think it's generally better to have these things be essentially vetted by somebody, so it's not just like if you buy something off the street, because let's be real, people are always going to do drugs. If somebody goes and buys something off the street, there could be anything in there, right? Like, I mean, maybe it's just marijuana, but maybe they've put chalk dust in there or something too, or oregano. I mean, some of those things, maybe that's fine, but there's other things that you can put in there that might be worse. This way, like, whatever it is clean. The state can actually tax it. If somebody's having an issue, they can actually go somewhere and get help about it without having to worry about it. And I mean, frankly, like, alcohol is very addictive and causes people to do lots of insane things. So I don't really think that weed's much worse than that. So I think it's probably for the best that it's been legalized. I think it's been going pretty well. Like I said, more money for the state, and I'm sure we can all appreciate that.
Are you familiar with mobile mental health crisis teams?
I am not.
Yeah, so these are teams that go out to non-violent, non-criminal mental health calls for services instead of police.
All right, I haven't heard them called that before, but I have heard of them, yeah.
So is that something that you'd be willing to commit to increasing funding for mobile mental health crisis teams for those types of situations?
Yes. I think, frankly, we expect police to do too much. They're not trained in how to handle a mental health crisis. So it's much better to actually send somebody out there who has training, who knows how to deal with that, instead of sending out somebody who, I mean, what are they going to do? Like, how are they actually going to help? Maybe they'll be able to help, maybe they won't, but like I said, they have no training. I mean, that's asking a lot of somebody. Like, I don't know how to talk somebody down from, like, a ledge, right? But, somebody who's trained in that would. So, much better to have a mobile health unit, then you can look at that and be like, okay, that's what they do, and then I feel like it's a little bit, it's probably better for the community. It's obviously better for the individual that's being responded to, and I think it'll actually make, policemen's jobs easier. It'll probably make, random other people's jobs easier, because you don't have to worry about, like, who do you call when this or that happens. Now you know.
Okay.
I think that's a good idea.
And my last question is, what are your proposals to the massive increase in unhoused people and the increase in homeless encampments?
Honestly, I think I've seen studies about this. I mean, I went to college, so I was in classes that talked about, like, social problems and things like that.
What did you major in?
I majored in industrial design.
Okay.
I'm just an infinitely curious person.
Okay.
So I was like, I'm in college. I'm just going to take all sorts of classes. So what I've seen is that really the only way to actually get somebody off the streets in a long-term way is to just like give them somewhere to stay for a while. I mean, if you look at like applying for jobs, most of them require you to have an address. So if you don't have an address, how do you get a job? I mean, it kind of becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy that I think can trap people in a really nasty situation. I mean, a lot of these people, oftentimes it's veterans, like it's people who have done work for the country and now, you know, for one reason or another, they're on the street. And I mean, we're really supposed to, as a country, take care of them. And so if we're failing even those people, then obviously we're failing lots of other people. I mean, you often see people who are running from terrible home lives or, you know, other awful things. And I don't want to fail those people, right? I mean, and like I said, I think most people would probably prefer that they be able to go get a job, live a better life, have somewhere to stay. I mean, you know, we often say like the base needs that people have are like food, shelter, like clothing, stuff like that. And I mean, studies show that basically the only way to actually fix that is to just give people somewhere to stay. So housing first is essentially the method, you know. And I mean, certainly we can see how expensive housing has been getting. And some of that is, I think, just people trying to make a quick buck off of folks. I mean, I have some friends who live like up in Chicago, and man, I'm like, geez, like that's the kind of, you're like 7 months in, you've already paid for like a car, you know. So, I mean, out here, housing costs are a little bit lower, but you just have a lack of them sometimes. And clearly nobody's willing to actually build any because they don't feel like they'll make enough money on it or, you know, what have you. So for me, like I said, I think housing first is probably the way to go just because when I've actually looked into it, that's pretty much what everybody says is the only real solution.
Yeah, so there is a push to try and overturn the ban on rent control. It's a state level. We have a ban on rent control and allow municipalities to decide. Is that something that you would support, overturning the ban on rent control?
Yeah, I think it's better generally to let municipalities decide that kind of thing. And, you know, obviously there should probably be some kinds of things in place to make sure they're not doing something weird, right? But in a general sense, I think rent control, sometimes somebody's just charging way too much. You know, they've got a house that's like falling apart and they're still demanding like thousands of dollars for it. Obviously that's not reasonable, but they can get away with it because there's absolutely, I mean, everybody has to have a house. It's like you basically will always have demand no matter how much you charge for some of these places. Somebody will have to live there. And I believe the general consensus that you should, it's like 1/3 of your paycheck on rent. And I think most places are not hitting that, not even a little bit. So I actually think that's probably a good idea. And I also just think it's often better to hand control of that kind of thing over to municipalities anyway. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. You have a good rest of your night.
Yeah.